Okay, let's dive into this. I'm just sick and tired of it. I don't want to be political, but guess what? I'm going to be. Wow, right? That is a highly charged, deeply emotional quote from Tom Homan, a veteran border security official and the former ICE director. It completely sets the stage for a major address he gave recently defending the Trump administration's border policies. Now, immigration is obviously one of the most intensely debated topics of our time, and speeches like this, they're packed with heavy claims, stark statistics, and some really powerful rhetoric. So in this explainer, we're going to objectively map out Homan's arguments. We're going to look exactly at how he builds his case, point by point. So, welcome to this explainer. If you're here, you're looking to cut through the noise and really understand the mechanics behind the messaging. Our goal today is to neutrally deconstruct the specific claims, the statistics, and the rhetorical strategies used in this major conservative address. Because by breaking all of this down, we can get a much better handle on exactly how strict enforcement policies are argued and justified by the officials who actually implement them. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at framing the border debate. Second, Trump's 3 directives. Third, addressing missing migrant children. And finally, defending law enforcement agents. Let's get started. All right, Section 1, framing the border debate and contrasting administrations. You know, whenever a speaker wants to make a really strong argument for a strict policy, they almost always set up a stark contrast. And Homan builds his entire argument on a very sharp problem and solution dichotomy between 2 presidencies. Homan asserts that the previous administration created what he literally calls a humanitarian crisis by design. He claims that by sending open border messaging, the prior administration actually incentivized illegal entry. He points to policies like 24-hour processing and release, taxpayer-funded hotel rooms, and free medical care as massive pull factors. Then he contrasts this directly with the current administration's approach, which he characterizes as delivering historic border security and strict enforcement that prioritizes American safety. He is fundamentally arguing that leniency causes chaos, while strict enforcement restores order. Now, to back up his critique of the previous administration's handling of asylum claims, Homan leans heavily on one specific number, 90%. He argues that 90% of asylum seekers ultimately end up with an order of removal. His assertion here is that the vast majority aren't actually escaping persecution based on race, religion, or political affiliation, but are instead coming for economic benefits and a better life. So, in his view, the system is being completely overwhelmed by economic migrants rather than true asylum seekers. But he doesn't just stick to administrative stats. He uses some really tragic human metrics to argue that quote-unquote open policies are fundamentally cruel. He states that under the previous administration, over 4,000 migrants died making the journey to the border. He slows down to really emphasize this point in his speech. The idea that policies perceived as humane or welcoming actually entice desperate people into undertaking incredibly dangerous and often fatal journeys. From there, he quickly shifts the focus from migrant casualties to domestic casualties, bringing up a massive number, 250,000 American fentanyl deaths. Homan argues that these deaths are a direct result of open border policies allowing uninspected drugs to just flow into the country. By placing these numbers side by side, migrant deaths and American fentanyl deaths, he's attempting to completely invert the narrative. He's claiming that strict border control is actually the only truly humane policy for everyone involved. Now, what's really interesting about this next part, Section 2, Trump's 3 directives and the core mandate. Homan moves from broad ideology to his specific operational mandate by sharing a pretty incredible personal anecdote. He recounts being fresh out of retirement out to dinner with his wife when his phone rang. It was the president asking him to come back and fix the border, and Homan was given these 3 specific, massive tasks: secure the border, run a mass deportation operation, and find missing children. Homan confidently told the president he could lock the border down in 2 months by dusting off old plans. The president's response? He shortened the timeline, telling Homan to get it done in just 1 month. This builds directly into his strategy for the second directive, mass deportations. Homan addresses media criticism head-on regarding who exactly ICE is arresting. He uses demographic breakdowns to defend his operation, stating that roughly 65% of those arrested are criminals, meaning they have pending criminal charges or actual convictions. Now, while he does acknowledge they're arresting non-criminals as well, he explicitly defends prioritizing public safety threats. His logic is pretty straightforward here. Every single time ICE removes a public safety threat, the country gets safer. Okay, moving to Section 3, addressing missing migrant children and the vetting contrast. Homan actually admits that while securing the border was an operation he knew exactly how to execute, finding missing children was by far his toughest challenge. He maps out a really severe critique of the prior administration's vetting process for child sponsors. Homan claims that nearly 500,000 children were leased to unvetted sponsors simply because the prior administration's main goal was to avoid the bad optics of overcrowded border facilities. He alleges that fraudulent sponsor IDs were accepted and that address checks routinely turned up supermarkets, parking lots, or shopping malls instead of actual residential homes. In one particularly shocking claim, he states, they discovered a single male sponsor who had 18 different children assigned to him. Think about that for a second. He then contrasts this with the current administration's protocol of verifying IDs, utilizing digital footprint tracking, and vetting every single person living in a destination household. So the crucial point is the result of applying these new tracking methods. Homan claims that by relying on the digital footprints of sponsors, tracking things like utility bills and credit cards, the current administration has successfully located 147,000 of these missing children. He notes that while some were safely hiding with family to avoid deportation, far too many were unfortunately found to be victims of forced labor and sex trafficking. To further underscore just how tragic the human cost of the border journey is, Homan cites independent studies revealing a truly harrowing statistic. Up to 31% of women admit to being sexually assaulted while making the journey to the United States. He uses this independent data point to aggressively push back against accusations that the Trump administration is inhumane. His counterargument is that by driving illegal immigration down 97%, they are mathematically preventing thousands of women from ever facing this horrific violence in the first place. Which brings us to our final section, defending law enforcement agents and the frontline reality. Throughout this whole address, Homan really takes on the role of a fiercely protective commander, standing up for the frontline workers of ICE and Border Patrol. He quantifies the public and political backlash they face with a staggering number, an 8,000% spike in death threats against law enforcement personnel. He describes a highly volatile environment where agents, along with their spouses and children, are being doxxed online. He even mentions that he himself requires a 24/7 security detail just to go to the grocery store. But he emphasizes that the rank-and-file men and women of ICE who are out there strapping on Kevlar vests every day to arrest the worst of the worst, they don't have that kind of luxury. In his response to those threats, extremely defiant, he adopts a highly emotional posture, literally challenging the cartels directly, saying, "To the haters and the cartel members who threaten me, come get some." He praises the president for changing the tactical approach, moving away from playing a defensive home game at the border, and instead taking the fight directly to the cartels in an away game. He confidently predicts that this aggressive posture is eventually going to wipe the cartels right off the map. To wrap up his defense, Homan explains exactly why he takes this mission so personally, and he does this by sharing some incredibly visceral, graphic anecdotes from his time as a criminal investigator. He describes standing in the back of a steel tractor trailer in 170-degree heat with 19 dead migrants at his feet, including a 5-year-old boy. He describes getting on his knees to speak with 9-year-old girls who had been abused by cartel members. By sharing these incredibly somber realities, he anchors his ultimate argument. A porous border absolutely does not equal compassion. It equals unimaginable human suffering facilitated by criminal organizations. And all of that builds right into his closing thesis. Secure borders save lives. For Homan, enforcing national security laws and fully supporting law enforcement isn't just about sovereignty. It is, in his view, the only true humanitarian approach to immigration. He insists that shutting down the border is literally the only way to stop the exploitation and death that occurs on the journey. So we've essentially mapped out the anatomy of a major political argument today. We've broken down how one official uses a mix of data, direct contrasts, and deeply personal stories to build a massive case for strict border enforcement. But it leaves us with a much larger question to think about. How does blending stark law enforcement statistics with visceral, emotional appeals reshape our modern debate on national security? When policies are argued entirely through the lens of life and death, how does that change the way we as a society evaluate what is right? Thank you so much for walking through this explainer with me. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.